If you have spent any amount of money on under-eye creams, patches, ceros, light therapy devices, or injectable fillers, and still wake up every morning seeing the same hollowed, sagging tissue around your eyes, there is a specific reason none of it has produced a lasting result. And the reason has nothing to do with the products themselves, or with your skin type, or with your age. The reason is location. Every single one of those interventions targets the tissue directly around your eye. The tissue directly around your eye is not where the problem starts. It is where the problem arrives. There is a point on the front of your shin, a specific strip of muscle you can press with your thumb right now if you wanted to, that is connected to the tissue under your eye through a continuous chain of connective tissue running up the inside of your leg, through your pelvis, through your torso, and into the bones of your face. When that muscle on your shin has been tight for years, and for most people over 40 it has been, the entire chain above it shortens. The tissue under your eye gets pulled downward, not by gravity, not by aging, by tension traveling up from below. 45 seconds of sustained pressure on that point on your shin releases the lowest anchor of that chain. And when the lowest anchor releases, the tissue above it has room to move back toward where it was, including the tissue around your eye. That is what you are going to learn how to do in this video. And I want to be direct with you about something before we go any further. This is going to sound unlikely. A press on your shin, lifting your under eye area, sounds like a claim that should not survive contact with basic anatomy. I know that. I had a version of that skepticism myself the first time I traced this pathway in a clinical setting. So rather than asking you to believe me, I am going to walk you through the anatomy yourself, step by step, so that by the time you do the press, you will already understand exactly why it works. You will not be taking my word for it. You will be following a chain of tissue that you can feel with your own hands, from your shin to your face, and the logic will do the convincing. Here is what success looks like before we begin. You sit down. You place your thumb on the front of your shin, about 4 fingers below your knee, just to the outside of the shin bone. You press into the muscle there with moderate pressure, firm enough to feel a deep ache, not enough to cause sharp pain. You hold for 45 seconds. You breathe normally. You release. And within the next 2 to 5 minutes, you notice that the tissue under your eye feels different. Not dramatically transformed, not 20 years younger, but perceptibly different, less heavy, slightly lifted, as if something that was pulling it down has let go. Because something that was pulling it down has let go. The question is why? And the answer starts with understanding one thing about your body that changes how you think about almost every visible feature on your face. Your body is not assembled from separate components bolted together at joints. It is one continuous structure wrapped in one continuous sheet of connective tissue. That sheet has layers, and those layers have pathways, specific routes where tension transmits from one region to another. When you understand that tension travels along these pathways, a lot of things about your face that seemed random suddenly have explanations. And the pathway we are concerned with today runs up the inside of your leg. Let me start with the muscle itself. It sits on the front of your shin. Put your hand on your shin bone. The hard ridge running straight down the front of your lower leg. The muscle sits just to the outside of that ridge. If you point your toes up toward your knee, you will feel it flex under your fingers. That is the muscle. Most people know it only as the thing that gets sore when you walk downhill for a long time, or the one that cramps when you start running after years of not running. It is involved in lifting the foot, controlling how the foot lands, and stabilizing the ankle. What most people do not know, and this is the part that changes the picture, is how it is anchored. The muscle does not simply attach to the bone and stop. Its attachment wraps around the bone in a way that connects it to the tissue lining the bone itself. That lining is a dense membrane that covers every bone in your body. And on the inner side of the shin, it is continuous with the tissue that runs up the inner surface of your lower leg toward the knee. The tissue does not end at the knee, it continues. Through the inner knee, up the inner thigh, into the pelvis. This is not a loose association. It is physically continuous tissue, connected in a way you can trace with your fingers if you press firmly along the inside of your leg from shin to inner thigh. Each section pulls on the section above it, and each section above it pulls on the section above that. I need to back up for a moment, because the inner knee is where most people lose the thread, and it is the most important junction in this entire chain. The inner knee is a convergence point. Tissue from your shin meets tissue from your calf, meets tissue from your inner thigh at this one dense area on the inside of your knee. If you press into the soft area just below and behind the inside knob of your knee, the bony bump on the inner side, you will likely find it is tender. That tenderness is not damage. It is accumulated tension from all three directions converging at one point. When the tibialis is chronically tight, it is pulling on that convergence point from below, constantly, year after year. And that convergence point transmits the pull upward into the tissue of the inner thigh. The inner thigh is not just muscle. It is layers of connective tissue, some superficial, some deep. And the deep layer is the one that matters here because it runs in a straight continuous line from the inner knee all the way to the pelvic floor. Straight line, no interruptions, no gaps, continuous tissue. So the chain so far, muscle on the front of your shin, anchored to the bone, connected through the inner knee junction, running up the inner thigh into the pelvis. 3 links, all continuous, all under tension when the tibialis is tight. And the tibialis in almost everyone over 40 is tight. It is tight because of footwear. It is tight because of walking surfaces. It is tight because of years of subtle movement restriction that accumulated so gradually, nobody noticed it was happening. The press you are going to learn releases the first link. And because the chain is continuous, releasing the first link reduces tension at every link above it, including the ones you cannot reach with your hands, including the ones connected to your face. Now, I put together a complete system that addresses all 12 access points along this chain and sequences them into a specific 30-day protocol with diagrams showing exactly where to press and how long to hold at each station. That is the Connected Face protocol. It is in the description below this video if you want the full sequenced approach. What I am giving you today is the single most important entry point, the one that addresses the foundation of the chain. And for many people, this entry point alone produces a visible change. The complete system simply builds on what you are learning right now. Let me continue up the chain, because the pelvic floor is where this gets urgent. And I mean that in a very specific clinical sense. The tissue from the inner thigh does not just arrive at the pelvis and diffuse into general tissue. It connects to the pelvic floor, the muscular sheet at the base of your pelvis, at specific points. The pelvic floor is not a passive hammock sitting at the bottom of your torso. It is an active, tensioned structure that is connected above to the deep abdominal wall. And the deep abdominal wall is connected above to the diaphragm. I want to slow down here because the diaphragm is the critical relay station. And most discussions of the diaphragm focus on breathing and ignore the structural role entirely. The diaphragm is a dome-shaped sheet of muscle and connective tissue that separates your chest from your abdomen. It attaches to the inside of your lower ribs, to the front of your spine, and here is the part that completes the chain. Its upper surface blends with the connective tissue surrounding the structures of your throat and the base of your skull. The tissue surrounding your throat connects directly to the tissue surrounding the bones of your face, including the bone that forms the floor of your eye socket, the orbital bone. So the complete chain, tibialis on the front of your shin, through the inner knee junction, up the inner thigh, into the pelvic floor, through the deep abdominal wall, into the diaphragm, through the throat, into the orbital floor. Every link is continuous tissue. Every link is under tension when the tibialis is tight. And the tissue over that orbital floor is the tissue you see when you look at your under eye area in the mirror. The under eye appearance you are trying to change with creams is the visible surface of the last link in a chain that starts at your shin. The creams are treating the surface of the last link. The press treats the source. I want to make sure the anatomy of the orbital connection is clear before we move to the protocol, because this is the part that took me the longest to accept when I first traced it. The connective tissue that wraps around the structures of your throat, around the tube that carries air and the tube that carries food, around the muscles that move your neck, around the blood vessels that supply your face. This tissue is not separate from the tissue of the face. It is the same tissue continuing upward. At the level of the jaw, it connects to the tissue that covers the outer surface of the jawbone. But on the deeper layer, it connects to the tissue that wraps the inner surface of the face, including the thin membrane that lines the orbital bone. When that deep tissue is under sustained downward tension, pulled from below by a tight diaphragm, pulled by a tight pelvic floor, pulled by tight inner thighs, pulled by tight inner knees, pulled by a tight tibialis, the tissue around the eye socket is being pulled downward too. It is a continuous mechanical event, not a local aging process. The sagging you see is tension arriving from below. The hollowing is tissue being drawn inferiorly by a chain that originates at your shin. I want to be careful about how I say this next part, because I do not want to overstate it. In the people I have worked with, and it has been enough people over enough years that I consider the pattern reliable, though I am not claiming it is universal. The single most consistent visible change from releasing the tibialis is in the under eye area. Not the jawline, not the forehead, the under eye area. The tissue under the eyes appears to respond first. And I think the reason is that the orbital tissue is thin. It is among the thinnest tissue on the face. When you reduce even a small amount of downward tension on thin tissue, the visible change is proportionally larger than it would be on thicker tissue. A millimeter of lift on the cheek is invisible. A millimeter of lift under the eye is visible. That is why this specific press produces a visible result that other releases along the same chain may not produce as obviously. So now you understand the chain. You understand why the tibialis matters. You understand how the connection reaches the eye. The protocol itself is simpler than the anatomy. I am going to walk you through 3 levels, and I want you to start at the first level, regardless of how flexible or experienced you think you are. Starting at the highest level, without building the tissue's tolerance, is the single most common mistake I see, and it produces soreness that discourages people from continuing. Start low, build up, let the tissue adapt. Level 1, seated position. You can do this in a chair, on the edge of your bed, anywhere you can sit with your feet on the floor. Cross one ankle over the opposite knee so the outside of your shin is facing up and accessible. Find the shin bone, the hard ridge running down the front of your lower leg. Place your thumb just to the outside of that ridge, about 4 finger widths below the kneecap. Press into the muscle, moderate pressure. You should feel a deep ache, not sharp, not burning, but a dense, specific ache that tells you the tissue is responding. Hold that pressure steady for 45 seconds. Do not move your thumb. Do not massage. Do not roll. Hold. 45 seconds. Breathe normally. After 45 seconds, release slowly. Lift your thumb over about 3 seconds rather than pulling away suddenly. Switch legs. Repeat. The most common mistake at level 1 is pressing too hard. The tissue has likely been tight for decades. It does not need to be forced. Think of the pressure you would use to check whether a fruit is ripe. Firm enough to feel the give, not enough to bruise. The deep ache should be a 5 or 6 on a 10-point scale. If you are at a 7 or above, you are pressing too hard, and the muscle will respond by guarding, tightening, rather than releasing. That protective tightening defeats the entire purpose. The second common mistake is pressing on the bone instead of the muscle. The muscle sits to the outside of the shin bone, not on it. If you feel hard bone under your thumb with no give, slide your thumb a centimeter outward until you feel the tissue soften. You are looking for a strip of firm tissue that yields slightly under pressure. The muscle, not the bone. Level 2, floor position. This level works when you have been doing level 1 for at least a week and the tissue no longer produces strong soreness the following day. Sit on the floor with your legs extended. Bend one knee and bring your foot toward you so the front of your shin is accessible. Place a tennis ball on the floor and rest the front of your shin on the ball, positioning it at the same spot, 4 finger widths below the knee, just outside the bone. Let the weight of your leg create the pressure. This produces a deeper, more sustained release than your thumb because the pressure is constant and does not rely on your hand strength. Hold for 45 seconds. Breathe. Release by lifting the leg off the ball slowly. The mistake specific to level 2 is letting the ball sit on the bone. The bone will hurt, and that pain is not therapeutic. If you feel a hard, sharp pain that does not have the quality of a deep ache, the ball is on the bone. Shift your leg slightly so the ball sits in the soft tissue to the outside. Level 3. This is for people who have been working with levels 1 and 2 for at least 3 weeks and want to extend the release deeper into the chain. Same floor position as level 2, same ball, same location. But at the 45-second mark, instead of releasing, begin to slowly point your toes away from your knee and then pull them back toward your knee while maintaining the pressure. This movement, pointing and flexing the foot, contracts and lengthens the tibialis under pressure, which breaks up deeper layers of accumulated tension that static pressure alone may not reach. Do 5 slow repetitions of point and flex, taking about 3 seconds each direction, then release. The mistake at level 3 is rushing the movement. If you point and flex quickly, the tissue responds with a guarding contraction, the same protective mechanism as pressing too hard. Slow is the operative word. 3 seconds to point, 3 seconds to flex. The tissue releases in response to slow, predictable load, not to fast, aggressive force. Predictable load tells your nervous system that the situation is safe. Fast load tells your nervous system there is a threat. Your nervous system controls whether the tissue releases or guards. You are communicating with your nervous system through speed, not through force. There is one more thing I want to address about timing, because the question I get asked more than any other about this press is when to do it. The answer is, it does not matter very much. Morning, evening, after a walk, before bed. The tissue responds whenever you address it. But there is one timing detail that does seem to matter based on what I have observed, and it is this. Doing the press after you have been sitting for an extended period produces a more noticeable release than doing it after you have been walking. I think this is because sustained sitting allows the tibialis to shorten and stiffen in its resting position, and pressing into tissue that is already shortened and stiff produces a more dramatic change in length when the tension releases. If you work at a desk or spend long periods seated, doing the press when you stand up from your chair is a reasonable timing anchor. Let me address what you should notice after the press, because this is where I can help you tell the difference between a real result and wishful thinking. Within 2 to 5 minutes after releasing both legs, look at your face in a mirror. What you are looking for is not a dramatic transformation. You are looking for a subtle change in the tissue directly below your lower eyelid. In most people, the change presents as a slight reduction in puffiness or a slight reduction in the depth of the shadow that forms where the under eye area meets the cheek. The skin does not change color. The wrinkles do not disappear. What changes is the position of the tissue. It sits slightly higher, slightly less heavy, slightly less pulled away from the bone underneath. If you do not notice anything the first time, do not conclude that the chain does not exist or that the press does not work for you. The tissue may need several sessions to begin releasing meaningfully. Remember, if the tibialis has been tight for 20 or 30 years, one 45-second press is asking tissue to reverse decades of shortening. The response is cumulative. The first press begins the process. The 10th press makes it visible. The 50th press makes it lasting. Here is how you know the press is working at a deeper level than just the tibialis. After a few weeks of consistent practice, and consistent means at least 5 days per week, ideally every day, you may notice changes that have nothing to do with your under eye area. Your inner knees may feel less stiff when you stand up in the morning. Your inner thighs may feel less dense, less stuck is the word that comes to mind, though it is not quite clinical. Your lower abdomen may feel softer. These are all signs that the release is propagating up the chain. The tibialis is the entry point, but the chain responds as a whole. Each station releases some of its accumulated tension as the tension below it diminishes. The mastery signal, the sign that you have genuinely integrated this practice rather than just memorize the instructions, is this. You will start to feel the chain before you do the press. When you sit for a long time and stand up, you will notice a pulling sensation that runs from your shin through your inner leg, and you will recognize that sensation as the chain tightening. Right now, you probably feel it as general stiffness. Once you have been doing the press consistently, you will feel it as a specific line of tension. That specificity of sensation is the mastery signal. It means your nervous system has mapped the chain. You are no longer working blind. You are reading your own tissue. And once you can read it, you can maintain it for life without needing anyone to tell you when or how. I have spent a lot of years watching what happens when people begin to understand that their face is not a separate system from their body. It is the end point of the same structural network that includes their feet, their legs, their pelvis, their spine. Every part affects every other part, and the direction of influence runs both ways. The body affects the face, and the face affects the body. But the body's influence on the face is almost always ignored because the entire industry built around facial appearance treats the face as if it exists in isolation. Creams for the face, exercises for the face, injections into the face, procedures on the face. And the face keeps aging, keeps sagging, keeps hollowing, because the source of the tension is not on the face, it is below. What I have witnessed in my practice, and this is the part that made me reluctant to discuss it publicly for a long time because it sounds so improbable, is that the most dramatic changes in facial appearance I have seen have come from work done below the waist. Not from facial exercises, not from facial massage, not from anything applied to, injected into, or performed on the face. From releasing tension in the feet, the calves, the shins, the inner thighs, the pelvis, from the ground up. The face responds to what happens beneath it, and it responds more obviously and more consistently than most practitioners in any field are comfortable admitting. I was not looking for this pattern when I first started noticing it. I was working on lower extremity issues, ankle mobility, knee tracking, hip restriction, and people kept mentioning changes in their faces, not as the primary concern, as a side observation. The same way you might mention that your sleep improved when you came in for shoulder pain. It was incidental to them. It was not incidental to me. Because once 3 or 4 people mention the same incidental observation, it stops being incidental and starts being a pattern. And once you have a pattern, you have an obligation to investigate it. So I did. The tibialis press was a result of that investigation. It is the single lowest point of intervention I have found that produces a reliable, visible change in the face. Not in everyone. I want to be honest about the rate because this is where credibility lives. In the people I have worked with who committed to daily practice for at least 30 days, roughly 3 out of 4 reported a noticeable change in their under eye area. The fourth person typically reported other changes: less inner knee stiffness, better ankle mobility, softer lower abdomen, but not a visible facial change. 3 out of 4 is not universal. It is strong, but it is not 100%. And anyone who tells you a single technique works for everyone in the same way is selling certainty that does not exist in the human body. Your body is not generic. Your tension patterns are not generic. What I can tell you is that 3 out of 4 is a high enough rate that this deserves your attention. And the press itself carries 0 risk when performed at the pressures I described. The weight of seeing these patterns repeatedly over years is what drives me to teach this publicly. It is not comfortable. The claim that pressing your shin lifts your under eye area is the kind of statement that invites skepticism from colleagues and mockery from people who have never traced a chain of tissue through a human body. I understand the skepticism. I had it. But the anatomy is the anatomy. The tissue is continuous. The chain is real. And the response to releasing the chain is visible. Those are observations, not opinions. I can set aside my comfort in favor of observations. That is what evidence requires. If you are doing the press daily and want to know whether the change is stabilizing or whether it reverts between sessions, here is how to assess it. Take a photograph of your face in the same lighting, same angle, same time of day before your first press, and then again at the 2-week mark and the 4-week mark. Compare the under eye area specifically. Do not compare overall face appearance. Too many variables change daily for that comparison to be useful. Compare only the tissue directly below your lower eyelid in the shadow it creates where it meets the upper cheek. That shadow is the most reliable visual indicator of tissue position. If the shadow is shallower at 4 weeks than it was at day 1, the chain is releasing cumulatively. If it is the same, increase your pressure slightly or try level 2. One thing I want to mention that rarely gets discussed in any protocol-based content: the days you do the press and feel like nothing happened are the days that matter most. Because tissue adaptation is not linear. Your body releases in irregular patterns. A noticeable change on day 3, nothing on days 4 through 8, another change on day 9. The days that feel empty are not empty. The tissue is reorganizing. The nervous system is recalibrating. The work is happening below the threshold of your conscious perception. The people who quit are almost always the people who expected linearity. Day 1, a little better. Day 2, a little more. Day 3, a little more. That is not how connective tissue works. It accumulates change quietly, then expresses it suddenly. The discipline is in continuing through the silent days, without exception. You came to this video because of your under eye area. You wanted a technique that would address the sagging, the hollowing, the puffiness, the shadow. And I gave you that technique. 45 seconds on the front of your shin, graduated across 3 levels, building tissue tolerance over weeks. That is real, and it works within the anatomy I walked you through, joint by joint, from your ankle to your eye socket. But I would not be telling you the whole truth if I let you leave thinking this was a video about your under eye area. It was not. It was about something much simpler and much more consequential. It was about the fact that your body operates as a single connected structure, and the visible features of your face are the final expression of tension patterns that begin at the ground. Your under eye area was the doorway. The principle behind it, that releasing the lowest point of a tension chain changes every point above it, applies to your jawline, your forehead, your neck, the position of your cheekbones, the depth of your nasolabial folds. It applies to everything you see when you look in the mirror and everything you feel when you stand up from a chair. The technique is 45 seconds on your shin. The principle is that you have been looking at your face for answers that live in your feet, your legs, and your pelvis. And now that you know where to look, what you do with that information is entirely between you and your body. That hollowed, sagging tissue you saw this morning was never the problem. It was a message sent from a long way below, and now you know where to send your hands in response. 4 finger widths below your knee, just to the outside of the bone, pressing into the dense, quiet muscle on the front of your shin.